think that is kind of the thesis, or one of the theses of the book. There's various ways in which that happened. Some of them were deliberate, and some of them were sort of almost by accident, a consequence of the macroeconomy driving some of these trends. So in the 1980s in London, you like I've said, you had a very different city. You had a lot of social housing. Almost a third of the city was social housing, and that was quite extraordinary achievement over the years of investment in the idea of the state providing houses to people. You also have private rented housing, but that private rented housing was regulated. You got quite long security of tenure in the private rented sector, and you also got rent control all the way up until 1988. And when you bought a house, also, it was very different. You typically borrow from a building society, which had a kind of mutualized structure, which sort of works against this endless inflation of property values, which we've seen in the years since. And through the 1980s, all of those things were stripped away. So the social housing sector was subjected to the sell-offs under the right to buy. Margaret Thatcher cut the sums of money that went into new build, so we effectively stopped building council housing. And it was done with a specific philosophy that the government's answer to the question of how do we provide housing to people who can't afford market rates shifted from being we invest in bricks and we build things for people to we give them benefits and they rent from a private landlord. That was very much Thatcher's philosophy. And then the private rented sector changed too. It was deregulated. We ended up with an absence of rent control in this process of very short tenancies which end, and the tenant can be forced to leave at the end of them. And that kind of drives a ratchet of, it's very easy for a landlord or for the market in kind of more economic terms to always find the tenant that can pay the most. You can as soon as you can evict someone quickly, you can find the highest paying customer, so you can drive those rents up and up and up and up. And then the banks changed in the 1980s as well. The building society model kind of fell apart and was demutualized, and bank lending, commercial bank lending, was deregulated too, and banks started to just arrive in the property sector in a much bigger way. They wanted to give people mortgages. They wanted to create these new mortgage products so that the idea is so that people can buy houses, but it's really so that investment money can start to be invested in property. And so we start on this train, but then what happens is in the 1990s there's this big sort of global fall in interest rates, and as you know, economists argue about what exactly drives that, but it happens across the world, and that does something to individuals in the UK, because it means you no longer have a pension, you no longer have a retirement plan, because the idea was you could save up money through your life, put it into a pension pot, and you could then retire comfortably and have a good older life. And because interest rates start to fall, for a lot of people that's no longer the reality. Their pension pots are too small, and they realize that the payouts they're going to get later in life aren't going to be enough to sustain them, and so they do look for something else. And the thing that they look for is houses, property. So they start to invest that money into property instead, and they invest it through these new kind of mortgage products that are created to get kind of non-business people, just kind of small, people with a little bit of extra cash to invest, to become landlords, to buy property. And so that starts to drive this investment in property that means we're now no longer pricing homes on the street according to what a family can afford to pay to live there. So it breaks the link between wages and house prices. Instead, what we're looking at is, what can an investor afford to pay for this? What's the investment value of this home? And because you have this deregulated private rented sector where rents can go up and up and up, the value to the investor is endlessly increasing, especially given that now London's population is growing so rapidly, because London's become the centre of employment for the country. Really, we've deindustrialized, we've focused all of our economic growth on this capital city, so it's where everyone wants to move, not just from Britain, but from the countries that we had formerly colonized. People want to come here because this is where economic opportunity is. And so because there's this kind of flow of demand of people for rented housing, it becomes a very good investment. People pour more and more money into it, and that just sends prices up and up and up and up over the next decade, until you reach the point in 2007 where obviously this party sort of starts to come to a bit of a juddering halt with the financial crisis. But then after that, you have another key moment, because we could have sort of got out of the financial crisis by saying, look, this model of kind of investment in property and investment in housing and sort of greed really that drove that collapse, albeit in the United States, is a toxic model that we no longer want to return to. But instead of that, the sort of economic decisions taken after the financial crisis and some of the political ones really supercharged that. The further collapse in interest rates, the sort of quantitative easing process that put a lot of money into the economy, but money that was then searching for an asset to invest in. And you had this process then of what comes after the financial crisis is big investment from money all around the globe into new development, but new development being not like Beckton, which we talked about at the start of this now slightly rambling answer, but new development as in 30, 40 story private housing, which is going to be sold at auction in Hong Kong to a series of kind of high net worth individuals and sovereign wealth funds and trusts all around the world who are looking for what they view as a secure home for their money in an insecure world. And that is it means property in big cities with stable governance. And so that becomes London. London is the number one destination for that for most of the 2010s. And that flood of money in sends property prices all around the city, into overflow. But within that, you have the communities that have lived there the whole time and people who are trying to live there and make a life. And so now we as Londoners, in order to live near my parents, for example, as they grow older and as my children grow up, I have to find enough money to compete with, half of the world's wealth, not enough money to, compete with another young man who wants a house, which is what it used to mean in the 1980s. So we don't value property anymore in terms of wages and in terms of what the people who live in it can afford to pay. We value it in terms of what it means to investors and what it means as an investment asset. And unfortunately, that's come about because of the economic decisions we've taken over the last 35 years. And we live now with the kind of homelessness and the sort of destabilization of communities and all of these problems from people unable to retire because they can't afford the rent, through to young families not having children because they don't have enough space. All of these things sit at the heart of root from that, which is that this basic thing that all humans need, which is home and shelter, has become something that investors want to make sure that they've got a secure return year on year, and it's being used to deliver that instead of what it's actually for.